This is Canada Reads American Style, featuring two friends who love Canada Reads and Canadian literature. Welcome our host Rebecca from Michigan and Tara from Ontario. Hi everyone, it is Rebecca, and today I am speaking with author Emily A. Weedon. Emily is a debut novelist and a screenwriter from Toronto, Canada. Her web series, Chateau Laurier, was the most awarded web series on the entire planet in 2023 and won a Canadian Screen Award. Her novel, Autokrator, released by Cormorant Books in April, is already receiving acclaim for its thoughtful messages, especially about women's health in a fractious world, for its wild creativity and its driving pace as a story. When she isn't writing, she enjoys baking bread and spends the rest of her time trying to work off the bread calories she's been eating. She lives in Toronto with her best creation, her daughter, Ginger. Welcome, Emily.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. I am just thrilled to bits to be here.
Great. Thank you. And I have to, for full transparency, I did receive a copy of your book from a publicist. It was an ARC. And as everybody knows, I really love this book. I've talked about it a number of times on different podcasts and also my review on Bookstagram. But I said to so many people, this was the right book for me that I had been looking for the last few years. And I loved it. So with that high praise, I'm now going to say, for those who have yet to read it, can you tell us a little bit about Autokrator?
Yeah. Autokrator is the story of two very different women, one who is essentially motivated by love and one who is essentially motivated by power. And they're trapped in a very autocratic, very dystopian world where women have lost all their rights. And they kind of inadvertently bring this society to a huge cataclysmic change. And I find it interesting that I wound up having to kind of split my character's focus, one into love and one into power, because that speaks a lot to what we as individual women wind up doing in our lives. And I think we'll be able to get into that some more today when we chat.
Okay, yes. Now, this is a really fascinating story, and the timing of it is impeccable in terms of what's what's going on in society. But what prompted you to tell this story? Like, how long had you been working on it, and what prompted it?
Such a long journey. It was 2011 when I first sat down at my kitchen table with this idea, and I was working through the tail end of a very bad relationship, and I was what's called a trailing spouse. I was living in another country while my ex was working, 28 hours a day, feeling depressed because of that. Made a valiant effort to learn the language Hungarian, which I love, but I wasn't picking it up. I was taking care of a 2-year-old. I was feeling like my brain wasn't getting the exercise it needed, and I was realizing I was trapped in a domestic trap. And that experience was so searing and lonely and made me wonder how many women have also had that kind of experience. And and essentially I asked myself, gee, what if the patriarchy were worse? And this came out of that.
Wow. Well, first of all, I just have to tell you, my family background, we're Hungarian. I've been to Hungary 3 times.
Oh
So
my.
that is fascinating to me. And I do know my sister's trying to learn the language right now. And it is, I know, a really tough language. So that's kind of fascinating.
It is. And of course, now that we're sitting here, I'm blanking on how to say anything. I learned how to say uh, "Egészségedre" was one of the words.
Oh my God. I have to laugh. That is the one word that I always laugh about because it's what you say when you do a toast, right?
Right, right.
Yeah. Oh my God. That's hilarious.
Um, yeah, it was, it's actually a fun language to learn, so that's very interesting. I will always treasure the time I spent in Budapest, I will say that. It is a fascinating place.
Yeah. So, was there a specific purpose in setting the story in the past versus the future? Because it felt like the past, and I remember there was the conveyance that they were riding in or something. So it felt like the past, but
Mm.
rather than the future. So, can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, so it's actually speculative. So it's neither past nor present, it's other. And I, there is a feeling of past vibe to it. I was obviously living in Europe when I started writing it, and I was surrounded by history, and I had visited some really interesting ancient ruins around the world that as my world started to kind of get a skeleton and roots to it, I was drawing on all these different cultures and places that I'd seen, but I really wanted to set it in a not then, not the future, not now, but different, so that I could have a clean slate from which to create a world and examine issues like gender without the trappings of our historical world, without things like Judeo Christianity, for example, without ideas of like the virgin horror complex, for example, that really sets up a lot of expectations about how women behave in the world. I wanted to start with a different patriarchy, a different society. So that's why you're feeling a little bit of the sense of history, but it is other.
Okay, that's really fascinating because I agree now that you're saying all of that because while I was reading it, I think my brain needed to slot it into a time period. So I was looking for clues as to where it was. And I
Mhm.
wasn't really opening my mind to the fact, but it did feel other because I couldn't put it in to a specific time frame. So
Mhm.
I think you did that successfully. I just needed my brain just needed to put it somewhere in a way, which is kind of
Of course, and, you can't create in a complete vacuum. We use different things as kind of ladders to get to the ideas we need, and, I found myself thinking of things like I wanted technology to be strange in this world. I wanted technology to be controlled, and I was thinking of ancient Rome when I did that. They apparently had steam technology, but didn't really use it because they were a slave-based culture, and it would have been a different world had they utilized steam, for example. So, in my world, my huge antagonist, the Autokrator, wants to control technology. And I started thinking of different times around the world. I started thinking about things like guilds. We used to have guilds in many professions. I myself am a member of both the Writers and Directors Guild. The idea of being a journeyman is wrapped up with that, and I believe it has its roots in the Renaissance. So once in a while, there's a sort of a whiff of
mhm.
Renaissance or ancient Rome or things like that in the building of this world.
Yeah. Now, you and I had kind of chatted a little bit after I read your book. I started chatting with you, just kind of DMing each other. And one of the things you said, which I really loved about the book ultimately, was you pointed out that not all women do, quote, everything uniformly in lockstep,
Mm.
which was, again, one of the aspects that I really appreciated. And I just thought, can you speak about that in relation to the characters and or our current culture in whatever way you want to express that?
Well, so it's really interesting. We we have feminism. We've had feminism for quite some time now. I think women still get treated like they're one other box. What's your race? What's your religion? What's your gender? And a lot of things are assumed based on how you answer those questions. And I mean, we're basically half the population. So how could 50% of all humans be all the same thing? And yet I think we're sold to that way. We're treated that way in politics. We're treated that way in terms of, well, you're a mother, so you understand. And I don't know about anyone else, but I'm an individual, and I can only be the mom and woman and person that I am through all of the experiences I've had. And I wanted to give some space to that feeling and thought, and have different kinds of women in this book, and women who work at cross purposes to each other, women who have different agendas, because we don't all have the same agenda. And I'm personally, as a 50 odd year old woman, quite tired of being treated like I should have one agenda with all other women. We certainly don't ask that of men.
Wow, that's really true. Wow, I'm I'm just kind of As you were saying all of this, because again, as I was reading the book, and I'm not gonna give any spoilers at all because I want everyone to approach this book the same way I did, which is I knew nothing. I just went into it and enjoyed the whole thing from cover to cover. But I wanted see, like, my brain wanted all the women to be on the same page because it was this very restrictive society, and Tiresias, was able to go out and be different in the world, which I loved her character,
Mhm.
but I still wanted everyone to want the same thing, right? And that's why I loved how deftly you told that story. You didn't hit us over the head with it, but it was just this really beautiful way of showing the complexity of women and their lives and their point of view. So, I'm that's all I'm gonna say because I don't wanna ruin
Well,
anything, but
we also live in such an interesting time of niche interests, and of
Mhm.
course, the entire time I was writing this book, which wasn't 14 solid years, it was bits and drabs here and there. I was watching what was going on, as we all have been in the States about politics, and we here in Canada are experiencing similar things. We can't all get behind one pole anymore because we all have different places we're coming from and different needs. I also laughed a bit to myself. I I love the satire in something like The Life of Brian. I don't know if you've seen it, but
Mhm, yeah.
they lampoon, if a different guy had sort of lived the life of Jesus, what would it have been like? And there's this classic scene where there's all these rabble-rousing, agitators who are sitting around, and they get Brian to join them, and it's this whole joke about the Judean People's Front and the front of the People's Judea and so on, and how they're basically the same, but they're all just at complete opposites to one another, and aren't we all that way a little bit these days, you know? So that it isn't humorous really in Autokrator, but that thrust is there. And I think at the base of that thrust too, it's part of my personality. I hate the idea of being shoved into the wrong shaped hole for me, you know?
Mhm.
I really, try to buck being put into a category.
That's so funny. I was just talking about this because, I am technically, the way it was categorized in the past, a boomer, and boomers have such a bad rap, which quite frankly, many of them deserve, but I
Mhm.
always hated having to say I'm a boomer, and then I just found out they have a new category for people born between 1955 and 1964, which I fall in that, and they're called Generation Jones, and I go, "Great." I told my sister, "I'm so thrilled that I don't have to be a boomer anymore." I don't like being slotted in that, but anyway.
That's funny. Well, I'm Gen X, and we're the completely ignored, between you boomers and the millennials and Gen Z, we're like, "Blip."
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, yeah, and so I have, debates with my boyfriend about this. He's like, "It's a construct. It doesn't even exist. There's no such thing as
Exactly.
generations like that." And yeah, we're all individuals.
Absolutely. Okay. Another point you made in our brief discussion prior to this was about wanting freedom from labels. I feel like you've kinda talked about that a little bit, but do you wanna expand on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's back to that idea of being forced into, monolithic belief systems in a way. And I remember, as I was writing the book, as I was beginning to, I was still a new mom as well, and I remember paying attention to things like it was lampooned very hilariously by Tina Fey in 30 Rock, the idea of stay-at-home moms versus career mothers, and just blown away by, people will attach they attach a label to themselves, and they kind of put all of their hopes and fears and identity into that label, and then other people use that label as a slur. So for one person, stay at home mom is a badge of courage, and to another it's a bad thing. Man, I don't want any of those labels.
Mhm.
And I think a label is where a person gets flattened, by society, and one another. And that's what's exciting about writing a book, though, that you get to expand a character rather than flattening them. So it's kind of the opposite of labeling somebody.
So how do you think, in terms of labeling, how do you think Tiresias would approach that? and Sarah. Do you see the two of them both just completely rejecting labels?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I mean, in their world, Sarah, for example, is kind of labeled by women around her. She was like I don't know if I use this phrase in the book. I don't think so, but like a pillow girl. There's some derision from other women, and I liked the idea that different women who have different métiers in the book. Some are bakers, some are more manual laborers. That it's a sense of group solidarity, and if you're not one of us, you're against us, kind of thing. Tiresias is a woman who, in a way, is a woman hater, and she's wrapped that up into her personality as a way to justify how the world could be so bad. I'm not saying I agree with it. I think it's terrible. But she's sort of wrapped that up in her thoughts about other women. I've done what I did because I'm tough and I fight and I do what it takes. And you other women who are being subjugated, well, you only have yourselves to blame. I think we get that kind of narrative in a lot of ways in the real world. So yeah, she wants to shed the label of being a woman or an unmale, as they're called in my book, completely.
Do you, and I don't even know if we've talked about this, but did you have like a favorite character? I know that's a horrible thing to ask, is maybe saying like who's your favorite kid, but did you have a favorite character, whether just in the terms of writing the character or maybe the finished character? Like, did you have sort of a favorite?
I mean, I love them all.
Hmm.
And when I put the book down, when I thought I was completely done with it the first time, of course you're never done. I felt very sad because I felt like my kids had all grown up and moved away from home. I got quite depressed about that for a bit. I adore Tiresias. Tiresias is sort of the laser gun that I use to fire off all of the feminist rage I feel at times, especially at being underestimated, especially intellectually. I focused all of those feelings into Tiresias, and I really wanted to write a character who was not only I didn't want her to be a protagonist. I didn't want her to be a heroine. I didn't want her to be a quote good guy. I wanted her to be free to be able to be a plotting, devious, bad character, because it's tiresome to be the nice girl next door, be the nice mommy. We don't get a lot of chances in literature to explore big, sprawling, evil genius female characters. We've given that so often to men. I wanted a female Iago, a female Machiavelli. And as she took shape, it was just, I feel like I didn't even have to work at it. She just blossomed. I also really enjoyed writing a character who is essentially an incel in the book, a male character. And I think a lot of people say this: the bad guys are often the fun ones to write, because it's just, you can get a lot of vitriol out, a lot of frustrations. A good writer friend of mine always likes to say writing is revenge. I won't completely disagree.
I love that. Okay. What do you hope? And I've said this before, we've asked authors this question a few times, and I'm always fascinated by the answer. And some have been, one in particular is interesting. I'll have to tell you about later. But anyway, what do you hope readers take away from reading Autokrator?
Number one, I really wanted to just tell a ripping good story. And the fact that it was about women was even secondary to that in my mind. I wanted to write something on an epic, adventurous scale that it almost feels terrible to say this these days because it seems like everything is so political, but that was entertaining. I wanted to write something that featured women that was as entertaining as we find Game of Thrones, for example, rollicking and sprawling. At the same time, the world was getting ever more wild and crazy and scary. As I was writing this, autocracy has certainly risen around the world. The idea of of the strongman ruler has, been more and more entrenched lately. I wanted people to take away the idea that power is dangerous, and power. You should be fearful of those who clamor for power, because it's almost never going to benefit anyone else except the person clamoring for the power. And that power is a corrupting force. And no matter how high your ideals, when you try to wrest power, uh, things seem to get twisted along the way. We've seen that in revolution and counter-revolution. I feel like there's a lot of saber rattling these days. There's a sort of revolutionary kind of whiff in the air, and I'm all for things changing, and I think we're making incredible changes in lots of ways. I am not into the idea of picking up pikes and swords. I think that's always a bad urge, and it leads to decades and centuries of strife. I hope that we can hang on to democracy as opposed to revolution. So, yeah, I wanted to take on all of those issues, but they are also plot points, like I say, in what I just hope is a really entertaining story.
Yeah, and I want to be clear to our listeners too that I think this would make a brilliant book club book. There's so many layers and so many things that you can take away from this book that would be a fascinating discussion, but it is at the base and absolutely, it's like you said, it's readable. Once I started reading it, I couldn't put it down from the beginning chapter, that first few words out of Tiresias's mouth. It is a rip-roaring story. So I
Mm.
loved it. So I don't, because sometimes my questions tend to be like more analytical, and I don't want people to think, oh, this is going to be this, dull kind of read. It's not. It's absolutely really fascinating. And again, the book I was looking for, and I have to laugh because I told you that my favorite character, I'm not even going to say who it is because I don't want to give anything away in the story, but I told you who my favorite character was, and I think she was more the going to take up the pikes and whatever, however you worded that.
Yeah.
She's going to do that. And I guess I'm at a point at my age, I keep thinking, I don't I don't have that much time left on this earth, right? And so I sort of feel like, will things be more normal by the time, like when will it? When will we get rid of some of this craziness in the world? And that's my biggest fear, is that this is how, like, this is it. Like, that's, we could lose our democracy. It could, whatever. And that's scary to me. And so that's why I love this one character, because I feel like if I had courage, I would do what she was doing,
Mm.
but I don't think I have the courage to do it. I just loved her character because she was fearless. And I loved that about her.
She's also pushed to the brink, right? And
Yeah.
she's I love the writing, the creative writing guy, Lajos Egri. Hey, there, another Hungarian. How about that? Who talks about, when the right moment to deploy your protagonists or characters are. She is a person who is at her inflection point. So yes, she's courageous, but she's also mad. She's been driven mad by the world she lives in. And I she's lived a life of privation, so she's got nothing left to lose.
Exactly.
And we have very much left to lose in this society still. So I'm definitely saying no babies in bathwater being thrown out. Let's just all calmly sit down and talk about things. But I know what you mean, and I I think you'll find this interesting. A lot of young women that I speak to, women in their 20s, when I pitch the book to them, well, it's about two women who basically tear down a patriarchy. You wouldn't believe the light in their eyes when I
Hmm.
say that. I feel like it's like something out of Star Wars, the rebels against the empire. There's that sense of, yeah, I'm ready for the structures to fall. And
Hmm.
the only other caution I will say is I was born ready for those structures to fall. I was raised, born in the 70s, told you can be prime minister, you are equal, just go out and grab your fate. And what? Where is this fate? How come I'm still getting, harassed and not getting paid as much? And Now I'm getting older and now I'm discovering I'm invisible as well. And what a shock to the system that is. First you're too sexy and then you're invisible.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, that's exactly no, that's exactly how I feel because at some point, because I'm younger than you, I mean, I'm sorry, older than you, but it's the same thing. It's like we were told it was going to be different. And I remember back in the day, it was like we made 59 cents or something to the dollar that a man made or whatever. And
Mm,
then if it still isn't equal. And I just think, God bless
no.
America. I'm like 65 years old and it hasn't changed enough. I mean, it should have just changed and it hasn't. And that's what's the frustrating part is I look at this and I go, wow, by the time I'm gone, like it may not be that much different. And that's
Yeah.
just like, how do you, but then I think, but then look at the long curve of history. Like, of course, it's not going to change in 60 or 70 years, right? It's going to take longer, but it's just frustrating. So that's why I say this book was the right book for me to read at the right time because the female characters, the society and these women were such compelling characters. Just loved I loved all of them. I loved everything that you did. And one of the things I do want to mention, and I don't obviously I don't want to give it away, but I just want to say that I thought your ending was absolutely brilliant because it was real. It wasn't this like wrapped up neatly, tied up in a bow at the end where we all live happily ever after, but it was a realistic way of showing how history works. And I
Mm.
just thought it was brilliant. That's one of my favorite parts of the book is that when I closed it, I went, damn it, I was there 100% for the ride.
Oh,
So,
that's so great. I did consider, a happily ever after kind of thing, which would have, it would have necessitated, I think, a reimagining of the entire book to be something maybe told like an arch fairy tale,
mhm.
perhaps. And my first love, right? Myth and fairy tale. But I had to reject it. Partly because you hit a certain point as a human living a life where you realize, the circle of fate keeps on turning. Sometimes you're up, sometimes you're down. There is no neat, tidy end. We're stepping in a river, and the river goes on. I'm so sorry. I keep getting notifications.
Oh, that's
I
okay.
don't know how to make them go away. But somebody just sent me a picture of the cover of my book, which is very exciting. I got sent a text from somebody who visited Athens and saw the goddess who is my book cover in the Athens Museum. And she looks a bit different in different lights and in different angles. She looked softer in this text I got. I love it. I think it's so exciting.
Okay, so talk about the cover because then I didn't know that's who that was or that's what she was representing.
Yeah,
Oh my gosh.
the cover was ultimately Sarah Cooper, who is the manager at Cormorant. She is the one who put that image forward, and we went through so many different iterations of what the cover could be because there's a lot going on in the book, a lot of layers.
Mhm.
Covers are always a tricky thing to pick. And I love that the goddess on the cover is a counterpoint to the pocket goddesses that the women each carry and have as a sort of emblem of hope and love. And that one is very refined, and that one is a little bit more homey and cruder in a sense. And that kind of runs the gamut of the idea of goddess, right? And because there is a nod to classicism and Roman and Greek history, that face just really worked. She also makes me think of the Medusa a little bit with that. Her
Mhm.
mouth almost looks like it's open. There's a bit of a grimace. She's like the drama face from the happy and serious drama masks. It's to me it's iconic, and she represents, my God, the suffering that all of us to live as a woman, really, as a human, yes, but really as a woman is so often to suffer, you know?
Mhm.
So, but she's beautiful at the same time and a little scary. And I love that she wraps that all up.
You have completely changed my view of the cover because I wasn't a huge fan of the cover. I have to admit, I was not a huge fan. And now I'm going to go back, I'm going to look at it, and I am going to love her? Because, and I love, can you talk a little bit about the pocket goddesses? Because one of the things you said you might do is give us a few pocket goddesses to give away, which we will do with this podcast. So can you talk a little bit about that? Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
happy to. And yes, I'm happy to send a few pocket goddesses your way to give away to some lucky readers. I think of them as good luck charms. I think of them as a touchstone. I was thinking of the idea of household gods, but of course, the women in Autokrator don't really have households. Pretty much all they have are their pockets. By the way, more than a lot of us women have in our modern dresses, right? More
Mhm.
pockets, people, come on. But I also really, after I read the last version of the book, and the pocket goddesses make some appearances at important points, I realized I just liked the idea of them so much, and I was like, "I'd like to have one myself." And I wound up playing with some ideas of what they looked like or might look like, and I thought of the ancient Venus of Willendorf figurine that was found by archaeologists. They found other similar ancient little images of women, three-dimensional images that may be fertility, maybe religious, maybe almost like a doll, who knows. And the idea was that the women in the book had these to remember their own mothers who they don't know, and as a connection to one another, and just it's a resistance to this extremely male dominated world that they live in. And she's soft and she's kind and she comes from the earth and she births us all. She's got deep roots. And so I made a bunch of them. I made them with plasticine, and then I figured out how to use silicone to mold them, and I made little uh, clay copies. Each one is a little different.
Mhm.
And I started carrying mine with me to places like my personal deep horror, the dentist. Uh, she fits right in your hand, and she's a good thing to squeeze. So she's almost like a fidget spinner
Yeah.
or a squeeze ball, and she's just present. And I have to also add, my mother passed away in December, and I loved her, and I love her still, but we had a pretty rough relationship, not a close relationship. She's Finnish. They can be quite taciturn, and I'm all, just hard on my sleeve. That pocket goddess started to become an image to me of the ultimate universal mother.
Yeah.
So she's important to me in a lot of ways, and people have responded to them and enjoy them, and it's really nice to be able to give something to connect a reader to the text.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. I'm telling you, that
Hmm.
is a beautiful story, but what a really, like you said, it connects the reader to the characters, to the story, to this book, to that cover. Oh my God. Totally gonna go
It
back
gives
and
a little, it's like instead of a raised fist or a waving flag, it's a
yeah.
nice little, it's an image of hope, and I hope what I think all of us need: unconditional love. From some
Mhm.
source, some sense that somebody out there has you and your interests at heart, right? Don't we all need
Mhm.
that a little bit these days?
Oh yeah.
Hmm.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And again, I always feel bad asking this question because you've just put this book out into the world and I love it so much, but are you currently working on anything for us for the future?
I sure am. I have a couple of irons in the fire, and the next thing up is another genre crossing piece. It's a horror slash thriller that puts new wheels on a femme fatale idea, and that brings anthropology and science to the idea of blood eaters, brushing cobwebs off our notion of the idea of vampires.
Wow.
There's also a very powerful group of women in this,
Oh my
and
gosh.
I had so much fun writing it, and I have plans for more to do with that one. And we've got some. I'm on the cusp of having exciting news about this thing, so stay tuned.
Okay. Now, when do we anticipate that might be available to us? Like a couple of years or
Oh,
less?
hopefully, maybe by next year.
Excellent. Oh my gosh, that one. My podcast partner Tara, I know will absolutely love it. She's a real horror fan, and I think I will even read this one, even though I often get too scared. But I think the theme just sounds fabulous. So I'm on board with that one as
What
well.
an exciting world there is, the horror writers and their readers in the world. What an amazing, cohesive group of people. It's such a cool community. It's, yeah, it's really neat.
The last thing I would like to ask is, are you currently reading anything you want to share with us that maybe you want to promote someone else's work?
Yeah, absolutely. I was at a really cool launch just about a week ago for a book called Eris, Eris, by Larry Gaudet, who is what a wild guy, what a big personality. He's a cup of coffee in human form, you know? And he's written this tech dystopia. It's almost a novella, I would say, and I've gotta say his voice is he's audacious, just audacious, which I love. I love, uh, grab you by the collar writing. I'm also a huge fan of Michel Houellebecq, for example, who's very polarizing, but, I just love that he shakes you around like a dog with their ball, you know? Ooh. But Eris so far has been really interesting. It's cautionary about social media and computers and technology and where we're all going, and I don't know any more than that, and I don't know where it will take me, and I'm here for the ride.
Oh my gosh, that sounds fabulous. Now, I don't know Michelle Wellebeck, so what does he write?
He's written, Serotonin, The Map and the Territory. He also wrote, Submission, which is sort of a near future imagining of France after basically the Islamic Brotherhood has taken over.
Ooh.
Um, and it polarizes people quite a bit. He's a French man, so the way he writes about women can be quite, you got to grit your teeth through it. But I think the thing to remember is I believe he always has his tongue in his cheek quite a bit, so he's satirizing a lot of things. He made me understand what farmers are going through in Europe in a way I hadn't really thought about before through EU politics, for example. And what I don't understand what makes him work. I've got to say, he is like a literary genius, but he can write about a not particularly likable male character wandering through their life in a fairly self-entitled way, doing nothing more interesting than shopping at the supermarket for frozen TV dinners, and I eat up every word. I don't know how he does it. I've stopped trying to figure it out. I'm just all right, just I'm here, take me for a ride.
That sounds fabulous.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Emily, thank you so much for this conversation. I've just really enjoyed it. And I want to just encourage everyone to pick up a copy of Autokrator. I promise you, you will read it cover to cover in a very short time. You will love it. And again, book club book, it would be a great one. So
Amazing.
look forward to what you do in the future. And I'll link to everything we've talked about today. And thank you so much.
Rebecca, thank you so much for what you're doing for authors because it's, they talk about writing the book, they talk about getting the deal. The big one is getting the word out to people and connecting readers to books they love. And you're doing very important work here. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. Immediately after my interview with Emily, she emailed me the following. Dundurn Press Acquisitions editor Russell Smith has acquired world rights to award-winning screenwriter and Autokrator author Emily A. Weedon's HEMO Sapiens, an erotic noir thriller pitched as a sleek The Hunger meets a twisted Hannibal that reimagines vampires through a lens of female sexuality and anthropology, wherein a homicide detective, while exposing a secret society of bloodthirsty women, will do anything to protect his wife and unborn child from a mysterious and powerful femme fatale for the ages. Publication is expected for fall 2025. We are so excited for Emily, and I'm sure Tara, look forward to reading her next book.
Thank you for joining us on our bookish journey. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing Canada Reads American Style wherever you listen. You can connect with the podcast and Rebecca on Instagram at Canada Reads American Style, and with Tara at On a Branch Reads. Until next time, keep reading.